Hello everyone, my name is Tom, and welcome back to the Runaway Club. Today I'm going a tad bit off format as an excuse to use my avatar that Nikki at Imaginative Art was awesome enough to make for me, so definitely go check her out, and in the future, depending on how long this takes to edit and all other factors, I may or may not use this format for the Runaway Club in the future. But for today, I'm using it for a show that I absolutely love. We're going to talk about Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is not only my favorite animated show of all time, but I believe it's one of the greatest stories of all time. The way that they handled so many mature, multi-dimensional subjects with nuance and depth is something to admire. Today I specifically want to focus on the way that Avatar handles identity. By that I mean I want to explore the sense of self and how it clashes or conflicts with the expectations or perceptions that society has for them. We'll even touch on how the writing subverts ideas of morality and how it brings us to an overall message of tolerance and understanding. Now without further ado, let's start the show. One of the most memorable yet disturbing episodes of Avatar: The Last Airbender is the episode The Puppet Master, where the gang meets an old woman from the Southern Water Tribe who lives in the Fire Nation. She was brought there as a prisoner of war during raids on the Southern Water Tribe and innovated a new waterbending technique to break free. That technique was bloodbending. This is incredibly disturbing because of how it affects Katara and her sense of self. She had always used her waterbending to help people and even heal them. For example, when Princess Azula almost killed Aang by striking him with lightning, Katara used her bending to save his life. So to unlock an ability in waterbending that is treated as a monstrosity is a confliction within her sense of identity, which is one of the key factors in making this episode so disturbing. The Last Airbender is a show that loves to play with the identities of its characters in ways that enhance the dynamics of the world, relationships, and even move forward the story. There are multiple characters in Avatar: The Last Airbender who transcend the roles that the world gives them to become something greater. Katara going beyond the gender roles of waterbending in the Northern Water Tribe to become one of the greatest waterbenders in the world, Sokka becoming an important piece in winning the war against the Fire Nation despite being a non-bender, and Toph becoming the greatest earthbender in history despite being a blind little girl.
I am the greatest earthbender in the world! Don't you two dunderheads ever forget it!
But one of the most important examples of characters trying to go beyond their place in the world comes from someone who didn't rise above his role in the face of adversity, rather he learned to reject it completely and find his own path, while also dealing with the barriers of being molded into someone he was not. In Avatar: The Last Airbender, the Fire Nation and all of its practices were introduced as intrinsically evil despite establishing that at some point Aang would have to learn how to firebend. This is an elephant in the room which is confronted through a specific character in Season 1. Jean the Deserter is a master firebender, and was a highly ranked member of the Fire Nation army who deserted his position because of his own moral objections to the militaristic natures of the Fire Nation. What Jean represents is a conflict between the nuances of his identity and the expectations that come with them. When he sees that Katara has the ability to use her waterbending to heal, he expresses that he's always had an envy for the practice.
I've always wished I were blessed like you, free from this burning curse. Fire brings only destruction and pain. It forces those of us burdened with its care to walk a razor's edge between humanity and savagery.
He feels burdened with the responsibility to control the destructive force that is fire, and even as a humanitarian sees his role as a firebender contradicting his values and makes him feel as though he has two conflicting identities. One that wants to help the world, and one built to destroy it. This is an important parallel to Aang's emotional journey as the Avatar. Being both an air nomad and a symbol of balance in the world, Aang is not only someone who has a pacifist view, but also someone who feels a responsibility to set a moral example of peace for the rest of the world. However, at the same time, being the Avatar, Aang has a responsibility to protect the world from tyrants like Fire Lord Ozai, who are beyond reason, as well as learn all four elements, which include the firebending that Jean struggles to burden because of a belief system similar to Aang's. This is of course a theme that comes back later in the story, which we'll discuss later. However, Aang meets Jean at a point in the story where firebenders are and always have been framed in a generalized and negative light, with few exceptions sprinkled throughout. But through learning the basics of firebending from Jean, our protagonist is now put in a position where he holds the burden of what it means to be a firebender and realizes how easy it is to hurt his loved ones without the proper self-control and balance, showing a new side to the practice. Jean represents a parallel to Aang and what he'll deal with moving forward on his journey, but in the context context of the present, he represents a foil to his former student Admiral Zhao, a high-ranking member of the Fire Nation army who revels in conquest and destruction. Admiral Zhao has the power and skill to be a fearsome firebender, but lacks the balance and self-control to truly master the discipline. Despite this being a character flaw that holds him back, it's also a behavior that's encouraged by his social expectations of the Fire Nation. Another way to look at it is the thing keeping him from truly mastering the art of firebending makes him an ideal soldier and more of a patriot in the eyes of his countrymen, therefore meeting the social expectations set for him. Many of the antagonists of the show, like Zhao, don't challenge their place in society. Instead, they are often in a position of power naturally, which they happily embrace. As an example, Azula, who her brother says has always taken to things naturally, while he has had to struggle.
My father says she was born lucky. He says I was lucky to be born. I've always had to struggle and fight, and that's made me strong. It's made me who I am.
Part of what makes the character of Azula so vile and unlikable is that she didn't earn any of her skill, talent, or power. Rather than work hard to become great, Azula was just born great. So like it or not, she is one of the most powerful and threatening figures in the show, and she loves it. She even expresses at one point that despite the fact that it hurt her that her own mother thought that she was a monster, she didn't think she was wrong, and proudly embraces that as part of who she is. Why? Probably because at the point in time that the show takes place, the culture of the Fire Nation encourages this. It's a piece of the foundation that allows its people to justify the horrific crimes against humanity that their nation commits. The nationalist agenda and plot for world domination is one that resonates with the general public under Lord Ozai. This is possibly out of a belief that firebending is an art of destruction, a belief that firebenders internalize as who they are, and as a result there's a manifest destiny-like idea that the Fire Nation is destined to destroy all other nations and take over the world, justifying their genocide of the air nomads as nothing more than a natural occurrence and overtaking of an inferior race. This is driven home in the final battle between Ozai and Aang, where Ozai says that
You're weak, just like the rest of your people. They did not deserve to exist in this world, in my world.
Showing the collective idea of those in the Fire Nation who take pride in the nation's conquest. The truth is, it doesn't make a group of people better than another just because they have the means to wipe out an entire civilization. The genocide of the air nomads in Avatar, paired with putting the viewer in the shoes of being the last of those people, automatically puts the viewer in a position of looking that very real ideology in the mirror. Realistically, you're not going to look at someone you're meant to experience a new world through and invalidate the trauma they went through when they lost their people by telling them that it was just natural because the people who committed genocide are superior. Not only that, but when you're confronted with characters who believe this, and a culture that has that belief ingrained into their society as justification for their actions, it's framed not as natural or justified, but as a disturbing lack of humanity. A driving force in the story of Avatar: Last Airbender, as well as the development of its characters, is about understanding the Fire Nation, the culture, diversity in points of view, the good and the bad. The way the viewer's relationship to the Fire Nation and its people changes is symbolic of the show's overall message of tolerance and acceptance, while simultaneously exploring themes of oppression. This is mainly explored through Zuko, who is one of the most complexly written characters in the show and animation in general.
Wait, we can't just leave him here.
Sure we can. Let's go.
No. If we leave him, he'll die.
Because the subversion of his identity and development of his character has many pitfalls and misdirections that he needed to overcome in order to find his path towards redemption. Zuko is put in a strange position where he is immediately propped up as the main antagonist of the story, but then as the story progresses, his place on the spectrum of good and bad starts to gray more and more over time. This is done for the fact that Zuko's identity as son of the Fire Lord puts him in a position of power and importance that he's not resisting but rather trying to live up to because his father rejected him and marked him as a disgrace. Through this event, his identity changes from prince and heir to the throne to
You're not a prince, you're an outcast! His own father burned and disowned him!
So from the beginning of the story, Zuko is trying to climb his way back up to that place of honor by capturing the Avatar and making his father proud. What makes Zuko a sympathetic character is the fact that his motivation is based not in maliciousness towards our protagonist, but desperation for his father's approval. Even early on in the story, we find ourselves expected by the text to consider Zuko's perspective. The writing even uses B-plots to make Zuko the protagonist of his own story, and in each case with Admiral Zhao, Azula, and even Fire Lord Ozai, Zuko has more personal stakes against the main antagonist than anyone else. The reason why Zuko is an antagonist in the first place is not because he is an evil person, but because he is trying to live up to a social expectation which is forced upon him and would make him the Avatar's rival. An expectation forced on him by his family, his country, and his past. But his uncle Iroh sees the good in his nephew and tries his best to put him on the right track. The turning point for Zuko's character was the moment when Iroh called him out on acting out of a desire to please a father who never loved him instead of following his own heart. When Zuko took on his alter ego of the blue sphere to find Appa, Aang's missing sky bison, it was after he had seemed to leave that side of him behind. Wanted by the Fire Nation, Zuko and Iroh became undercover refugees in the Earth Kingdom and found a new life within the metropolis of Ba Sing Se. Of course, the irony being regularly noted that Iroh was once a general sent to conquer Ba Sing Se for the Fire Nation and now finds himself leading a very happy life as a citizen of the city.
Destiny is a funny thing.
Iroh got his own highly praised tea shop. They had a nice apartment in the upper ring of the city, and they were on track to be able to have a bright future. Iroh was very happy, but Zuko still felt obligated to live up to the image of the person he was expected to be, specifically putting it as wanting to achieve his destiny. To do this, Zuko felt it was his responsibility to capture the Avatar for the Fire Nation. Iroh knows what Zuko is trying to achieve and why, and he also knows that it's not what's best for Zuko, and doesn't believe that it will make Zuko happy. Iroh presses his nephew to ask himself what he wants for himself, instead of trying to live up to the person he's expected to be.
Is it your own destiny, or is it a destiny someone else has tried to force on you?
Forcing Zuko to self-reflect and start acting on his own moral compass, instead of a desire for his father's approval. What's crazy is the fact that this turning point is so extreme for Zuko that he actually became sick. In the text, it's specifically stated that Zuko's decision to let Appa go so he could reunite with Aang conflicted so much with Zuko's sense of self that it put him at war with himself, both mentally and physically. You may know that after this ordeal, Zuko did not magically turn around completely and stay good for the rest of the story. He would end up taking the first opportunity to go back to the Fire Nation to reclaim his title of prince while Iroh was put in prison. All Zuko had accomplished was his turning point in a journey towards redemption and still needed to find his destination. He was still too vulnerable to the idea of regaining honor in the eyes of his father to not give in to what Azula was offering. When Zuko was given the opportunity by his sister to realize his former destiny, he takes it because it's still a piece of who he is, especially with how his past inspires people to view and treat him. Once he has finally lived up to the person he was expected to be in the beginning of the story, he comes to that goal changed by his journey. Zuko satisfying the outward expectations of who he is supposed to be was at the price of compromising who he knows he is deep down beneath his guilt, shame, and anger. This is where his need to move on beyond his given identity to realize who he really is comes from. Then, a greater sense of responsibility comes into play when his uncle Iroh reveals to him that his great-grandfather Sozin, who started the war and wiped out the air nomads, was only one of his great-grandfathers, with his mother's grandfather being Aang's past life, Avatar Roku. These two sides to Zuko's family symbolize the two sides of his identity. Expected to be the next Fire Lord and continue Sozin's legacy of imperialism, but having Roku's compassion, sense of duty, and responsibility. This is also where Zuko's true destiny and relevance to the main story is revealed, not to continue the Fire Nation's reign of terror, but to bring it to an end with the help of the Avatar. The action Zuko takes to realize this new destiny is first to confront his father. Zuko reprimanded Ozai for the fact that all Zuko ever wanted from his father was his love, but instead that father challenged a 13-year-old boy to an Agni Kai, scarring him for the rest of his life. Zuko then told his father the reality that he faced outside the Fire Nation, the way the rest of the world sees them, and how everything they've done has made them deserving of the fact that everyone hates them. He then states that he's decided to join the Avatar and teach Aang firebending, and once Zuko officially rejected the expectations of who he should be and denounced the purpose his father chose for him, he was now ready to move on to the next chapter of his journey. Once Zuko earned the acceptance of Aang and his friends, he needed to rediscover his purpose through the origin of firebending. So him and Aang went to the Temple of the Sun Warriors. This quest was important for the main characters to learn from the last dragons in the world that firebending isn't just an art of destruction and pain. What Zuko and Aang found is that firebending is an art of life, as each flame is alive with its own heartbeat and life force, which is a beautiful thing that should be respected. This development is an important part of Zuko finding a place in the world as both Fire Nation royalty and a force for good. This is also a moment of growth for Aang, who overcomes his fear of firebending from when he heard Katara, and this is development for firebending itself as an art in the eyes of the viewer. It's It's a development for the core beliefs of who firebenders are and what the Fire Nation should represent. From this point forward, firebenders and members of the Fire Nation are treated as humans instead of just good ones and bad ones. An example, once Zuko has earned the trust of most of the group, Katara continues to have reservations, as she was imprisoned with Zuko and Ba Sing Se after his turning point. She saw that Zuko had legitimately changed only for him to turn around and help Azula nearly kill Aang only moments later.
I thought you had changed!
I have changed.
She understandably did not want to trust him, so Zuko's way of earning her trust was to help her find the soldier who killed her mother so that she could seek justice. This episode was one of the most deeply layered stories in terms of morality ever and establishes the moral question that would come into play in the conclusion of the series. A conclusion which is foreshadowed through Katara. When confronted with the man who killed her mother, Katara feels a level of hate that most of us possibly can't even begin to imagine unless we've had a similar experience. And yet she couldn't bring herself to kill or even hurt him like she said she would. Even after referring to him as a monster in a dehumanizing way, trying to strip the person in front of her of all humanity and worth, she can't manage to detach herself enough from the fact that despite his crimes, this old man is still a human being. Even with everything she feels, her moral intuition, and possibly Aang's pacifist influence kicks in and she sees the man in front of her as a pathetic and sad excuse for a human being, but not as someone who deserves to be murdered. This is one of the most important moments in teaching empathy and tolerance in Avatar: Last Airbender. But another central theme to Avatar is the value of life and why we should respect it, which is explored through the identity of the Avatar himself, Aang. Before we move on, I want to talk about something important. A few of you have asked me if it's possible to buy the cool Tom Aesthetic t-shirt that I designed and wear in Let's Talk with Tom, at conventions, or in the 7-star photograph with Dave Meltzer. Also worn by this new avatar drawn by Nikki at the Imaginative Artist on YouTube and Instagram. Well, I'm happy to tell you that if you head over to Roundtable Teespring, you can indeed buy this shirt and many other designs to rep your favorite cartoon commentary channel. No, not them, I was talking about. Buy Roundtable merch. I'm not saying they'll make you cooler than your friends, but I'm also not saying that. Now, back to the show. In many stories where there are forces of good and evil battling out in high-stakes conflicts, we get used to not only accepting death, but often celebrating it. The death of a villain is a good thing because it means that the good guys won. But in the eyes of Aang, who was raised by monks, there's never a reason to end someone's life, no matter who they are. This is an easy value to have in the real world where few people will ever find themselves in a position where they'll even have to question whether or not they should kill someone. But it becomes difficult when you're the lead in an action show where the situations challenge values like this to the point of framing you as the bad guy for not wanting to kill. And even beyond the context of the story, audiences rarely respond positively to peace in a story that is built on combat. If you look at Gohan from Dragon Ball Z and the path he took in his teen years, it's actually very rational from the perspective of the real world.
I just wanted to fit in here, and I thought if people saw me flying around the city fighting crime, they'd think I was some kind of freak.
Most people won't train to fight aliens in favor of focusing more on their career. Gohan in the real world would be praised for making sacrifices to be successful, but instead people say Gohan was ruined and turned into a pathetic nerd because he stopped trying to be the strongest fighter in the universe, in favor of actually finding a real-world career.
Super Saiyan, here goes.
This is also a sensible reaction in the frame of Dragon Ball Z, where the only thing that matters is being strong.
You never said you were gonna hit back.
I never said I wouldn't.
But that's not how things are in real life. The point here is that people don't like seeing pacifism in action shows, and Avatar, even with a strong focus on those types of morals, isn't quite an exception. I've gotten into long debates over the way the story chose to handle the final battle. However, I took to social media to get a more diverse sample of opinions on Aang's internal struggle and how he handled it. Some said it was perfect, some said Aang was too hung up on his feelings, and some said that the way it played out was deus ex machina and too convenient, but still recognized that it was important to Aang's character to avoid killing Ozak. So overall, it seems that most people do agree with Aang's position, but it's still a pretty mixed bag. For anyone who may not know what happened, Aang was faced with the task of killing the Fire Lord and wasn't feeling too sure about it. As much as Aang understands the monstrous things Ozai has done to the world, he still cares about the life that would be lost by killing, no matter what that person has done or who they are. What I've heard many people say is that this makes Aang look weak and childish, and they ultimately reprimand the fact that in their eyes, Aang was putting his feelings over the fate of the world, which is a strange position to take, but not one beyond understanding. So many of us have grown up with media that doesn't demand that we consider the real-life implications of what happens on screen. Even if we do consider those implications, it's easy for us to justify killing people by citing their wrongdoings and labeling them as a lost cause, to the point where we believe the only good thing they could do for the world is die. This is a toxic mindset that actually affects the way we treat people, the way our societies are run, and even how we view ourselves. Just look at how we treat the poor, the sick, drug addicts, and our prisoners. Look at the amount of self-loathing there is in the world from people who can't maintain a constant level of moral purity. We hold ourselves to such a high standard to the point where we don't even see value in people who make mistakes. I'm not saying that we should excuse problematic behavior, and I do believe that there are some actions that are beyond redemption, but we shouldn't write off those who seek redemption or wish death on those who don't. That's why I not only agree with Aang's position to not kill the Fire Lord, and agree that it's the most in-character way for Aang to confront the situation, but also I think it's important to the central moral discussion that Avatar wants to have. The position of the Avatar is to maintain order and balance in the world by any means necessary. Because of this, the Avatar is expected to be unafraid to kill those who threaten the balance of the world. The world even seems to give the Avatar a pass to do so. This is clear when Iroh says that despite the fact that he would be able to defeat Ozai himself, history would see it as more violence between brothers, which is why Aang must be the one to take down Ozai. This is an expectation that conflicts with Aang's sense of self, and is really the first time that Aang has to seriously confront this confliction between expectations and identity that most of his friends have had to confront throughout the story. Aang says that killing the Fire Lord doesn't feel like who he is, and faces not only a dilemma of values in killing another person, but a dilemma in his sense of self. There is an extra layer of weight on Aang's shoulders to carry on the legacy of the Air Nomads and represent the values of his people because of the genocide against his nation. To go against his people's values while the entire world is watching would be betraying them and their memory. While past airbenders who took on the role of Avatar were able to justify the killing of others in order to fill their responsibility as the Avatar, they were not the last living airbender carrying the burden of being the sole representation left for their roots. Other Avatars who were Air Nomads had an entire race of people to uphold the values and traditions of their culture while they were away being the Avatar. Aang doesn't. Aang is the only person left in the world who can uphold those values and traditions, so being asked to compromise that isn't something that he can easily comply with. At the same time, Aang knows who he is and understands the responsibility he has to the world. As cruel as it is for someone to ask him to betray his ancestors and take away the life of a father, a brother, and a leader of an entire people, leaving that man alive is putting every other group of people in the world in danger of suffering the same exact fate as the airbenders. So what is the solution? As the Avatar, Aang is the link between the physical and spirit world. So a lion turtle called to Aang in his sleep and took him on a personal journey to ponder the question of how to defeat the Fire Lord without killing him. Then, after speaking to his past lives and discovering that all of them expect him to kill Ozai despite Aang's moral objections, the lion turtle gave Aang the ability to bend energy. This ability was used by Aang to take away Ozai's ability to bend. That way Ozai would have no power, removing the threat he posed to the world. A lot of people say that this is Deus Ex Machina, which is a device that's not intrinsically flawed unless it's contrived, which I don't think the lion turtle is. Yes, it was not established before this point in Avatar: Last Airbender that lion turtles were even a thing, but at the same time, this wasn't the first time that Aang had an encounter with elements of the spirit world shortly before a climactic point in the story. During the invasion at the North Pole, Aang went into the spirit world to learn from the Face Sealer about the spirits of the moon. Let's also not forget when Aang visited a guru to master the Avatar state before the battle at Ba Sing Se. Now at the end of the story, when Aang finds himself in personal turmoil on how he will defeat the Fire Lord without murdering him, it is implied that this is a question that goes beyond the guidance of anyone from the physical world, and Aang will go on a similar journey to the ones before. So this wasn't out of nowhere. It fell in line with the structure of every arc before it. Would it have been better if they established the existence of lion turtles, as well as their significance to the Avatar and bending before this point? Of course. Especially when the presence of both the spirit world and the Guru were addressed before the North Pole and the coup at Ba Sing Se. The fact that we didn't even discover the importance of lion turtles until Legend of Korra when one plays such a big role in the climax of the story of Aang is at the very least a missed opportunity. Imagine how hype it would have been if we knew when seeing this moment how important lion turtles are in the world of Avatar. With the amount of time spent exploring and building the world, it's crazy to think that they never mentioned the origin of bending when it would play such a big role in how the show would end. Regardless, it was important to have Aang take away Ozai's bending instead of killing him, because by not killing him in the face of the world expecting him to, Aang rose above the responsibilities of the Avatar. Though the world would give him a pass to murder the Fire Lord, he didn't want that. His responsibility was to restore balance to the world, and to him that included not giving into the violence and destruction that the legacy of Sozin put in place. As the Avatar, Aang has to act as a leader. He has to be the one to set an example for everyone else, and it would be difficult for him to ask for peace from the world to end the chaos and violence when he himself has partaken in that violence by taking someone's life. This also makes Avatar Last Airbender stand out because they took us on an epic tale that focused on a single tyrant in a way that sets our expectations to believe that the only possible outcome is to end the Fire Lord's life, only to go against that expectation. Going along with that trope would have contradicted with the central message of the story. The entire message behind the redemption of the Fire Nation would feel cheap if they went ahead and killed Ozai because he's the evil Fire Lord and he deserves it. The point made when Katara didn't take revenge on the man who killed her mother would become null and void. The credibility of the overarching message of peace, acceptance, and the ability to change would lose its merit if the show fell into the rut of, okay, but this guy was really bad, so we had to kill him. Aang refusing to kill the Fire Lord, despite having the power to do so, was a statement of peace. Possibly the most important statement that the show makes, and ends the series by asking us, the viewers, to be more empathetic, expand our capacity for forgiveness, and do what we know is right even when the world tells us differently. Thank you so much for watching The Runaway Club and joining me in this analysis of an incredible show. Don't forget to keep the conversation going down below, and if you want more of me, you can subscribe to me on my personal channel, which I'm constantly struggling to be more active on, or you can follow me at TommyPQM on Twitter, Tumblr, and Instagram. You can also follow at Roundtable Vids on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. As always, we ask you to like this video, share it with your friends, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the Roundtable and hit the bell for notifications. If you're feeling generous, you can pledge to us on Patreon for perks like your name at the end of our videos, or a shout out for your channel, blog, or anything you want to promote. I hope you have an awesome day, and I'll see you next time on The Runaway Club. See ya!